Hello to everyone tuning in. My name is Arif Adiputra. You can call me Adi. And together with me, I have a very good friend of mine, Ryan Swa. And this will be the first podcast, hopefully, of many to come. Today, we'll be covering the May 18th parliamentary session and just give a wider opinion on Malaysian politics in general, given the recent developments that we've had over the past few months. And of course, I would just like to make a disclaimer, as I always do, that these are just our own opinions that we feel that we would like to give into the mix. We're very enthusiastic about politics in Malaysia and its developments, so we feel that it's good for us to try to express our opinions, especially as youths, so that we won't be complacent in how we move forward as a nation. So I'd like to hand it over to Ryan to give his own opening remarks.
Yeah, I think what Adi mentioned just now was a pretty good summary of what we plan to do here. Just to let you guys know that Adi and myself, we're both university students. So these are just our own personal thoughts as members of the youth population in Malaysia, our thoughts about politics in general, and also on what is happening to a country socially and economically. Yeah. So as Adi mentioned, we are going to be talking about the latest political showdown in our nation for this year. So the May 18 first parliament sitting of this year. And the reason why it's so significant is because of what has transpired in the previous months. In February, you had the Sheraton move. We had a ban of rogue MPs from Pakatan Harapan jumping over to the opposition. And then they formed a government, yada, yada, yada. And then now we have a new government in office. And this day was the first sitting in which the new government gets to show off, their seats, if you will, just to flex their muscles, if you could say that. But yeah, just to get like your opinions about this, Adi, about what you think of this particular day and the controversy and the news surrounding it, just to get your views on it.
Because the only agenda for the parliamentary meeting was the King's speech. He covered around a range of topics such as the current COVID pandemic, the adoption of the Industrial Revolution 4.0 within our curriculum and our political economy. But what really stands out was his continued affirmation and his approval of Tan Sri Muhyiddin as the current Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Right.
So that was one. And the second to note was his appeal to the members of parliament to stop all this polarizing political battles within the parliament itself and to focus on more pressing matters such as the pandemic.
But I'm pretty sure that the king, in his constitutional powers, is not allowed to do that, is he?
I think that is playing a huge role in deciding the themes and the whole tone of the parliamentary session. Because understandably, Malaysian politics is extremely polarized, especially in the last few months. So, as a concerned citizen myself, I find that it is polarized. So I don't think it's far-fetched for the king himself to hold those kinds of sentiments. Whether or not it was right for him to express so, that's up to debate.
I see. Yep, that is a very fair point. I think let's just dive into a little bit of what Parliament means, and what the King's role is in our Constitution. Constitution is basically a book which lists our country's founding rules and rules that govern our country, and the people that govern our country will abide by. I'll just dive deeper into the role of the king. So the king is a constitutional monarch. That means he is binded, if I can say that, binded by the Constitution of Malaysia. And the reason why the reason why this thing has transpired, and the reason why the king had to play kingmaker in deciding which government or which prime minister holds a majority, is because his role in the Constitution is to appoint the leader of the House, the leader of Parliament, which is also the Prime Minister. And Parliament, as you know, actually, I'll pass the mic on to you, Adi. Would you give our listeners a brief, a short recap of what Parliament is and what legislation is?
All right. So much like how we follow the Westminster model of governance, Parliament falls under the body where decisions are made, where policies are being proposed, and soon it will be tabled off into the upper house, the Senate House, and it will be brought over to be approved by the King. Much like how in the UK they have a constitutional monarchy itself.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go back to the discussion at hand, which is the May 18 Parliamentary Showdown. All right. So did you watch the King's speech, or did you just read like the highlights of it? Because I just read the highlights of it, to be honest.
I was watching a few times actually.
Oh yeah. Interesting. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the newly formed government and the ever disheveled opposition, if that's an appropriate term to use for Pakatan Harapan?
All I can say is that Pakatan Harapan just doesn't have any. I mean, I do feel bad for a lot of the component parties finally being able to win voters' confidence in the last election, only for the recent developments to happen. They just can't have a break. Suffice to say, for me, in my personal view, I find that the whole it sort of undermines the process of democracy within Malaysia. You have a huge takeover, huge parliamentary shift of MPs moving from one side to the other. And I don't think that's properly reflective of what the voters back in 2018 had hoped for or their aspirations were.
But I believe that this is all centered around money politics. We see this in Thailand, we see this in Indonesia, and I think it is part and parcel of a very much wider issue at hand, which is corruption.
Yeah, that's very much so a trend we can definitely see in developing countries, where the regime has a lot more power rather than respect of the state itself. So in many ways, whoever is the ruling regime is pretty much would dictate the directions of the state. So a lot of power is vested within whoever is able to hold as many seats as possible.
Yeah. Because it's at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. If you have over the threshold of about 111 seats, you get to control basically the country. So I guess when you boil it down to numbers, it's really simple to understand. But at the same time, you realize the kind of pardon my language, but the kind of shit that you're in.
And you can see that because of this, a lot of politicians who has a vested interest, who possess enough resources, are able to distribute those resources or take use of an issue, make advantage of it for the sake of political expediency. They're able to take advantage of it to garner more support. So very much so in the context of Malaysia is whoever is able to appeal to sentiments on the ground or able to muster enough resources to distribute, they are placed in a very good advantage to hold power. Yeah,
that's true. But despite me not pulling it back to the parliamentary sitting on May 18, despite me not watching the proceedings happen, I saw a few clips about the seating arrangements of the opposition and of course the government. So in a parliament, there is the leader of the house, which I previously mentioned is the prime minister or is the leader of the biggest coalition / party in parliament, and every single parliament must also have a leader of the opposition. So the leader of the opposition's job is to counter and to ensure that the government is accountable for its actions. So that is the reason why we have opposition parties and government parties in parliament, so that both keeps each other accountable. The government keeps opposition accountable in being good at criticizing the government, and the opposition keeps the government in check, ensuring that it doesn't abuse its power when it is running the country. So what I noticed in the few clips was that the new leader of the opposition is now Anwar Ibrahim. Now, it's all back to square one for him, is it?
I was saying that it's quite sad state for Anwar Ibrahim after so many years what he's went through, only to come back to square one and still have nothing out of it.
Yeah, which is, I'd say the man has worked very hard, bringing forward the, the Justice Party's agenda into the Malaysian political scene, instilling the hope of a reformasi in millions of Malaysians. I think what he's done is amazing. But actually, the central character is not him in this story. It's more of the chairman of Bersatu, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, and the future of his involvement and his faction's involvement in Bersatu, a party that he started in 2016. And I noticed that Mahathir was sitting very close to the middle, and he was sitting very far away from Anwar Ibrahim, because the furthest right would be the leader of opposition, and the front bench of the opposition would be the key figureheads that lead the opposition in parliament. And Tunem was sitting very far away from it. And just so happens, this morning, we see that Tun has been sacked, along with a few other notable people like his son Mukris Mahathir, as well as Syed Saddiq, being sacked from Bersatu because of their defiance of their leader, which is Muhyiddin Yassin. So what are your thoughts on that, man?
If you given Mahathir's track record, he does have a conniving and wily side to him that is almost, you can say it's very unpredictable. If I had to rank one of the most cunning politicians in Malaysia, Mahathir is definitely on the top. For being able to survive how many years as Prime Minister in his first tenureship, and still survive a political career at his age, it does lend a lot of credence to his defiance of being able to just take on any opponent that he can. Perhaps you could identify that as removing a potential threat. However, you could also argue that Mahathir himself, he won't stand sitting idly by.
That's true. Especially when you have one of the youngest and brightest minds in Malaysia in the political scene, Syed Saddiq, who is a very close ally of Tun Dr. Mahathir. On Mahathir and his legacy, there is still so much to talk about him.
Look at it as like a consolidation of power on Muhyiddin's side. He became Prime Minister on very shaky grounds. He does not command a very healthy majority within Parliament, and anything can happen really in Malaysian politics. Perhaps Muhyiddin is Prime Minister now, but behind the scenes we don't know whose allegiance belongs to where. So in an effort for Muhyiddin, I think it's very apt for him to be able to secure any and all threats to his administration.
Yep, fully agreed. Especially in the current times of Malaysian politics, when it's so polarized. Especially when we have people calling the DAP, for example, a communist party, a secular Chinese party only for Chinese. I think, especially when you have these sentiments going around, not just the Malays, not just the Indians, but not just the Chinese, but even in Sabah and Sarawak. Yeah, especially in the time of great polarization in Malaysian politics, we see that tribal politics and communal politics is coming into play, not just for the Malays, the Indians, or the Chinese, but even for our friends in East Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, which has very intense communal and tribal politics happening within those states. I mean, you would know better, right, Adi? Adi's from Sabah, by the way.
Yeah. No, I would say that despite Sabah always priding itself on being very tolerant, very open to people from all walks of life, I feel there's always an underlying suspicion of each other, such as even back then when PBS was on the rise, they were able to use a lot of rhetoric to instill a lot of nationalist sentiments within the local population, and that aided them well for a time. So you can see, even tracing back then, there was a lot of tribalistic mindsets, very primordial sentiments within the Sabahan psyche. And you can see that the manifestations of it has been peeking out more and more into the the mainstream narrative of Malaysian politics. It has always had its moments before, such as how Sabah has always tried to affirm itself that it is a partner, equal partner, quote unquote, to the federal government, and has always tried to make a stance on being able to voice out its grievances of how it has certain special rights that it was promised when the federation was formed. Not to the point or as vocal as Sarawak, who has always been very active for their own level, for more autonomy for themselves and self-government.
I guess when we're talking about Sabah and Sarawak politics, and them always being the kingmaker in the numbers game, the political numbers game, I think, well, even when Pakatan Harapan talked about returning or reducing oil royalties, I think Sabah and Sarawak were still receiving the shorter end of the stick. They've been receiving the shorter end of the stick during the time under Barisan Nasional, in which their needed resources like funds for building schools, for building infrastructure, were all channeled and focused into the peninsula instead. And I think, given the situation that they find themselves in Barisan Nasional, and how Pakatan Harapan was unable to ride on that fact that they need the vote of Sabah and Sarawak in order to stay in government, I think they still play a very, very much a very important role in a sense to this day, especially if you look at the fragility of the PN government right now, with only a slim majority of 3 people. And yeah, Warisan definitely has a stronger role to play now, not in the context of just a numbers game in parliament, but for the future of Sabahans, in a sense. We see a legendary veteran politician in Shafi Abdal, throwing the towel down, resigning from his post back in 2016 along with Muhyiddin, and joining Mahathir on his crusade to save Malaysia. I think that in itself is a very good kickstarter to ensure that Sabah and Sabahans' voice is heard in the federation. But yeah, it's not really that easy in a sense to rewrite, or I would say not repeat what has happened in the past 60 years when it comes to the mistreatment of the East Malaysia by the peninsula.
Adding on to Ryan's point on dynamics of Sabah, of course, the whole Pakatan campaign was extremely attractive to people that wanted to see changes and see some kind of reforms. However, a point of contention was, what kind of changes did we expect? Back then, they did publish the manifesto, which itself was extremely attractive, but we found out that the manifesto itself was promising too much. Of course, we say that Pakatan Harapan, something new, something fresh, but many of its leaders, especially on the Bersatu side or those directly aligned with Mahathir, are the same people that were back then still in Barisan Nasional in UMNO. So would you say that it's still new, or is it more or less the same, just rebranded? Like many people say, it's just UMNO 3.0 with just a new brand, a new motto, a new mission.
Yeah.
So I think
it's very much akin to what Tengku Razali Hamzah set up in the 1980s to rival Mahathir when he wasn't happy of the UMNO presidency result. How he created Semangat. I think it's a rebranding of sorts of that particular political party back in the day. Well, as you know, Semangat 46 was very, very popular amongst the rural Malay voters in the 1980s. I think they contested in that general election in the 80s, and I think they won a substantial amount of seats. Similar amount to which Bersatu had won in the previous general election. But then we see that in the following elections afterwards, their popularity really dropped. And as you know, Tengku Razali Hamzah is now back with UMNO, and he is a figurehead in Kelantan politics to this day.
That's how dynamic Malaysian politics is. It's comprised of so many linking threads with each other that it's hard to divorce one political issue from another, or any development from let's say something happening elsewhere. It's all somehow always related and always goes back to similar origins.
Yeah. One thing that I took from I would say the parliamentary sitting not only did we see an opposition with Mahathir taking a backseat and his future and Sadiq's future in Persatu in doubt, but we also see a rejuvenated Perikatan Nasional, a new face in UMNO, and a new face in terms of what I'm talking about is the cabinet lineups that they have. We see current UMNO politicians such as the current UMNO president Zahid Hamidi and Najib, former President Najib. They aren't part in the cabinet lineup at all. And this is because of, obviously, to abide by UMNO's stance that it is a party that is anti-graft. And so they do not place any of their leaders in executive positions because they are in trial. But besides that, I see that, obviously with the COVID-19 issue happening and with Parliament needing to abide by the, social distancing rules, we see that these two figures, Najib and Hamidi, as well as Hadi Awang, which is the president of PAS, them taking a literal backseat, which is to sit in the stands and not on Parliament floor, but I would say figuratively as well, in the sense that the new generation of UMNO leaders are coming up. They are smarter, they are wittier, and they definitely have a fresher outlook on politics and how politics is to be played, especially with the appointment of Sabri Yaakob as defense minister. We see him being the former leader of opposition, how he was a dark horse in a sense for anyone to ever count as the next top executive or the next leader of UMNO. In the end, he was chosen as one of the few senior ministers from UMNO to be part of Muhyiddin's cabinet. We see Azmin taking a second in command role, sitting right beside the prime minister. Something that Anwar could ever dream of. but let's not. Okay, bro.
But going back to, I would like to ask this question. When it comes to your idea of the new generation politicians, a lot of these people, although they have a extensive political career, you can see that a lot of their expertise are also very heavily specialized outside the realm of politics, such as Azmin, who he himself carries himself like a professional rather than a standard Malaysian politician.
That's true. A very modern outlook as to what a traditional leader would be like. We see leaders like, for example, Abdul Rahman Dahlan, for example. We see leaders like Bung Mokhtar, who are very brash, very confident, very hands-on kind of leaders. And we see someone who represents the middle to upper classes in Azmin, very prim and proper, looks very well educated, and generally shows off a more modern outlook as to what as to the stereotype of what a Malay politician is, or what a Malaysian politician is in general. Because we can't just focus on Malaysia. We must also focus on the Chinese and Indians, whom also have some very questionable politicians in the past. For example, Chua Soilek, and you also have Sami Value. we are all really, really familiar with his antics. But yeah, a very, very new outlook on the new government of Malaysia. Yes, we still have the old cabinet ministers in, let's say, Ismail Sabri Yaakob, Wee Ka Siong, Noraini Ahmad. We see all these remaining figures in the previous Barisan Nasional administration coming into the fold in this new cabinet. I think that despite people calling this a legitimate government, I think that especially in this time of need for stability in our nation's politics, with all the coronavirus things going on, I think it's worth giving them a chance first, because what we Malaysians want is not just a government that is firstly multiracial, represents all us Malaysians, but we also want a government that can actually take care of our needs financially.
To add on that, I think this whole COVID pandemic is a perfect litmus test for Muhyiddin's administration, really. It's it is difficult times, but it's the best time for him to prove himself as a capable and strong leader to guide us through this whole ordeal.
And I think that has worked. We have seen the benefits of his leadership. Well, although we still have those incidences where we have ministers saying that we should, how women should dress up like Doraemon in their households to please their husbands, or they have, TikTok competitions and stuff. Besides those points, and also one good thing would be that, besides the health minister claiming that there are over 500 countries in the world, they still have their benefits. They still have, they still have shown their qualities in other sectors. Obviously, COVID-19 has reduced significantly in our country, and although we're still fighting against it, I think we are slowly but surely winning the battle. And yes, some credit should be given to the current administration, and I think it's too early to write them off yet, and to brand them as, how to say this, brand them as the old Barisan Nasional, or the
backdoor government.
Backdoor government, yes, backdoor government. But
yeah, I mean, of course, the ideal situation was a set of fresh elections, and of course, right now that is not a feasible solution given the pandemic. But we have to work with what we got.
Yep.
This is the reality that we have to face right now. So let's look at what of course, the government has released its own stimulus package to help alleviate some of the economic woes that the pandemic would cause on the country. Mm-hmm. And it is quite a huge commitment to make for the government. But going back on that, what do you think in terms of policy, the government has done in the face of this? Since we are discussing the trials and tests that the new government has, do you feel that they've handled the whole pandemic issue properly?
I think, you've touched upon the stimulus package. Well, I like to reserve my comments on the stimulus package for now, because I feel that, whatever they've done in terms of, every single government in the world, or most governments in the world, they have had stimulus packages or injection of cash into the economy by giving wage subsidies, for example, by ensuring that small enterprises don't go bust, because really the drivers of our economy, chunk of it is from SMEs. But I'd like to talk more about Malaysia's fiscal situation as a whole. I have my reservations about the stimulus package because of this one fact. It's because I don't think that Malaysia can actually afford to pay back this loan that they're going to be taking out for the stimulus package, for the sole reason because we have not actually solved our graft issue. And by taking out such a huge lump sum of cash, or using this huge lump sum of cash, we see that we are ever spiraling into economic uncertainty. Well, everyone complains about how the previous administration wasn't able to handle graft properly, which I agree to a certain extent. They didn't manage to root out the problem of graft. Although yes, they put corrupt leaders on trial, they didn't actually help solve the issue on the ground when we talk about corruption and talk about financial mismanagement in the government. And for all that he's lauded for, Lim Guan Eng's tenure as chief minister in Penang did yield very positive results for their financial situation. But I'd say the federal government is an entirely different ballgame. And so far, we've seen little to no progress in terms of us improving our current debt situation. So it is necessary, yes, I'll agree with you. The stimulus package is absolutely necessary for us to ensure that citizens and people don't go hungry, businesses stay open, and people get paid. It puts a really grim reality of what's next to come, which is us having to bear the consequences of this withdrawal. If you could.
For me, it's the initiatives the government will take after this whole COVID issue blows over. It's the role of government to play financial institutions. So I think, in a way, political stability is a very paramount priority, and given the political trends right now, I don't think it precipitates the whole atmosphere of security or stability, of a cohesive political atmosphere.
Especially when you see ordinary Malaysians suffering because of the economic fallout, because of the coronavirus. we see the government bickering and playing politics at this time of need for many struggling Malaysians. It's just very sad. It's just very, very depressing, disheartening to see that they prioritize politics over the well-being of their citizens.
But could we say that there could be a silver lining in this? Because this is an issue that affects everyone. It's universal. No one is exempted from this whole tragedy. But could you say that the silver lining we can take from here is that it can help cultivate some further unity and harmony amongst Malaysians, because we're all in this together, and Muhyiddin says that no one should be left behind.
That's true. That was a very fine touch, when he made his maiden speech and he gave a short paragraph in English. We are not alone. We are at war with invisible forces. That was a pretty classic.
It's very effective. It's very effective rhetoric, very effective. Uniting everyone. Yes. But do you think that we could actually, take advantage of this spirit for more cohesion, stability, and harmony with each other? Do you think that it's a possibility, or would you take a more cynical outlook on, politics is always going to mess it up again somehow, or will we see a new attitude that focuses on prosperity and fostering stronger relations with each other?
Yeah, I think we leave cynicism to the older generation. I think we as the youths should be more optimistic, and I certainly am more optimistic. I say that there are two things that we need as a nation in order for us to get rid of, I'd say, tribal politics or racial tensions and stuff. I think firstly is if we improve the education system, people are more educated, more people can go to schools, and the schooling system is improved, people would then be able to look above toxic politics, look above what divides us and see what actually unites us as Malaysians. And the second point would be the general well-being of Malaysians. If we improve the economy and improve the livelihoods of Malaysians, well, firstly, people have to recognize that people who live in the city or people who are from middle to higher income class families are facing different needs than those who are in the lower class, the B40 in society. And a few cents or a few ringgit can mean the world to these struggling families. And you must recognize that these people, their needs are to survive. And if we can take care of their needs and we improve general well-being of these people, I think that will lead on to a more educated populace, and then we can get rid of this toxic culture of how politicians influence the weak in society, influence their opinions, their thoughts, and who they vote, and bring about a new generation of, I'd say, able-minded Malaysians and
more politically informed, more responsible,
politically more informed voters, and as well as more policy-driven politicians, not politics-driven.
Yeah, I guess it's a systemic issue in general, and a remedy for that is better awareness, better education. Like you mentioned, that we need more improvements to the educational system that we have. But it's hard to say that kind of reform when we look past this, the COVID-19, like they say, is the new normal. I think education will definitely be reformed to fit the new normal as we move into a different era where things will become more focused online. So it could be a good jumpstart to some kind of reform.
That's true. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see as to what that reform may be. So I think we'll just I think we've gone on long enough.
But touching on that is that sometimes it's not up to the government to teach you how to think. It's on ourselves as well. It's on our roles as citizens as well to educate ourselves, become more aware. So maybe that should be whoever's listening. Always try to seek out knowledge, draw wisdom from any source that you can, and don't be afraid of learning something new, I guess.
Yep, that's true. And it also ties back to the points I've made, the 2 points that I made. Firstly on education, secondly on improving the well-being of Malaysians. Yes, we had heard stories of people being unable to attend school because they need to feed their families and stuff. So I guess to ensure that people in the rural areas, people who are working in the primary sector of industries in the country, like the farmers, the fishermen, really is to improve the education system, improve their well-being, so that the kids can go to school, and this is how we bring about a more educated, a more self-aware populace. And I think once that happens, I think we'll have a more healthier political landscape in Malaysia. But yeah, I think enough of that. I think we'll just move on to let's talk about predictions, shall we?
All right.
So this is the first time. May 18 was the first time we saw the new government in action in Parliament, and with a parliamentary sitting expected to happen in June, all of us can't wait to see what this new government is made out of. So there was a lot of things circulating in the media about, especially when Muhyiddin first came to power, about the Not My PM movement. You want to touch a little bit about that?
All right. For me, my opinion on the Not My PM movement, of course, it takes a lot of inspiration from American political scene when Trump was elected. That's something entirely on its own. It is a cry for more democratic practices. It's saying that we're not being democratic enough. How is it that Muhyiddin is able to be elected from the fact that just because a few people hop from one party to the other, and it's the idea. Hopping one party to the other is a very undemocratic practice, because whoever holds more influence can easily sway people that was already committed to one side to join another, and the electorate may see that representative only because that they were representing the interests of one party. Then next thing you know, they jump ship. It's not really fair to the voters. So you take this on the national level, you could definitely see why people are upset. It's a very justified movement. I mean, I also understand that this whole Muhyiddin being PM is also undemocratic, and for me, I'm worried that it'll set precedents in the future that this is a very acceptable practice, and I don't believe that has to be the way.
Exactly.
I think we need more. We need to strengthen our democratic institutions. We need to prevent all these hopping with anti-hopping measures. It's the same when during the 2018 election, when Sabah's case, Barisan held the majority just by a slight margin, and you have people from Barisan crossing over to join Pakatan. A lot of people were noisy about that, but they were noisy about this whole Muhyiddin issue. So what I can say is that there is a level of double standard there, and I think we have to call out hopping wherever it is. We have to call out any measure of hopping wherever it's happening within the political scene, regardless of our affinity for a certain party. It's even better if you can hold your own party accountable, because it shows that you actually have a genuine interest and would like your party to succeed. And definitely a party will succeed when it's true to its values, when it does not play anything for political expediency.
And I think what Penang did was that they instituted an anti-hopping law in their state legislative congress. I think that is a pretty good move in a sense, especially with all the things going on. And when you talked about political hopping or party hopping, and when you talk about the political scene right after G14, Mahathir has bitten off more than he can chew by accepting a lot of UMNO politicians into the ranks of Bersatu. And I think, judging by how little or I think almost none of them have chosen to back him, and instead they've chosen to back Muhyiddin. I think that goes to show that there aren't really any true friends in politics. And I guess, accepting UMNO politicians into the ranks of Bersatu was a very bad idea for Mahathir, and I think that was the beginning of the end for his downfall.
Loyalty is fickle, as they say. Moving on to predictions, back to prediction. Since we're talking about hopping, I think I've been talking with a few of my friends as well, who also has a vested interest in politics. And I know if you're listening to this, I know you know who you are. A lot of horse trading is taking place, so there will be perhaps an even bigger shift in the months to come, especially with Mahathir very vocally stating that a vote of confidence is up there on a potential agenda for the next parliamentary session.
Yeah.
And Shafi Abdul himself says that a vote of confidence is very most likely possible for restoring Mahathir as Prime Minister. So there will, I think, a lot of political developments are happening behind the scenes. And I think we could definitely see a strong movement for calling back Mahathir as the rightful Prime Minister.
And not Anwar?
There'll definitely be a segment of people who will support Anwar for the sake that he was the promised next Prime Minister. But some will hold that, because Mahathir is the safer, quote unquote, safer option, they would go to him. But given how
less liberal option,
given how Bersatu is how it is now, that kind of changes the cards a bit.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Ryan? What do you feel about this?
Well, my sentiments are the same. I think well, it will be fun to see what happens in the July parliamentary sitting, whether or not this vote of confidence ever gains traction. But I think that, like I said previously, I think we need to give the current government time, because bickering and throwing our country into another political turmoil is not going to do anyone any favors.
True.
Especially in the future when we're just coming out of and we're just recovering from the COVID-19 crisis. We need to ensure that our economy is back on track. We need to ensure that things function normally as they should. And I think there is no harm in giving Perikatan Nasional more time if it means rebuilding our economy, if it means rebuilding Malaysia post-crisis.
And I think Perikatan Nasional would also use that kind of rhetoric to still contain any vote of no confidence.
100%, yeah.
They'll find a way to maneuver around it, definitely.
Yep.
But I think, of course, that's a very pragmatic approach. And I can say that from Malaysia's policies itself in terms of security and foreign policy has always taken a very pragmatic approach. And even Malaysians ourselves, we can be quite pragmatic ourselves. It doesn't matter, if someone rules in power for so many years, as long as they find that it is most beneficial to them, the one that can ensure their good quality of life. It doesn't really matter. So that could also be a challenge for more democratic practices.
On the point of democracy, I think that in order for the populace to be more democratically aware, I think we need to focus on the bread and butter issues first, making sure that people have enough to go by, making sure that livelihoods improve, standard of living improves. Then people can start to care more about democracy and democratic processes and stuff like that. Just like the whole issue that Pakatan Harapan inflated about ICED, which was a bill ratified by the United Nations on elimination of discrimination, and the Malays were very enraged by this because they felt that by ratifying this, it means that it will make the Bumi Putra rights null and void. They are afraid that their rights will be taken away and stuff like that.
A very conservative portion of Malay society, I would say.
All right, Adi. All right.
No, it's not good to paint everyone in one brush.
That's true. That is true. That is very true. I apologize, but yeah, a certain segment of Malay community, a certain segment of the Malay populace felt that it was unfair to them, and they protested vigorously against the implementation of ICED. And yeah, I think that if we are to ever see a more democratic Malaysia, bread and butter issues are the way to go. Once people have improved standard of living, they can start to care more about the rules that they are governed by, the people that govern them, and what can they do to improve the situation in Malaysia as citizens.
So I think that is what me and Ryan can give as a suggestion of what we can do to better ourselves. We are almost out of time, and of course, there's a lot of things that I would love to continue to discuss. So, is there anything else we would like to wrap up, Ryan?
I think we've covered a lot for this session. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, man.
All right, for the first time for everything.
First time for everything.
All right. So, do you have any closing remarks then?
Well, actually, nah. I think we've said plenty. But yeah,
Uh,
thank you so much for all those tuning in. Hopefully this will be the first episode of many more to come.
mhm.
So yep.
Yeah, and of course, me and Ryan are still students. We wouldn't say that we're experts in the field, only that we're very passionate and enthusiastic. And if you do like what we're trying to do here, please show some support. And maybe one day we could try take on a request to cover certain topics, and we'll do our best to try address them.
That's a good idea, actually.
Mhm. All right.
So yeah, I guess yep. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll speak to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. Bye.